We, in Detroit, we're very familiar with the Christmas llama, incompetent as he was. New York was very familiar with the Times Square bomber as incompetent he was. Both of those had the bombs exploded would injure or kill hundreds of Americans. So let's not have Janet Napolitano take credit for what happened there. They got away. The only reason why Americans were killed because they were incompetent. So it's going to happen because of political correctness. When Janet Napolitano, the Attorney General of the United States, will refuse to say radical Muslims or Islamic terror. If you cannot identify the enemy, how are you going to defeat it? I've got a lot more to say about it. I talked about frauds. I'll just do this. I'll talk about frauds. You know why I said Americans are frauds? Because if you look at a fraud, and you roll the fraud in a boiling pan of water, the fraud is going to jump out. But if you put a fraud in a cool pan of water and slowly turn up the heat, the fraud will remain there until it is boiled to death. That's what's happening to America. Incrementally, they're destroying our liberties, and we are sitting passively allowing it to happen. Look just what the Supreme Court has done in the last 50 years, while most Americans acted like frauds. In 1962, they struck down school prayer. In the case of Engel versus Vitale, the U.S. Supreme Court said that prayer in the public school violated the establishment clause. Here was the prayer that they were talking about. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our children, and our country. End of quote. Unconstitutional. In 1963, they declared pornography a free speech right. In 1963, that same year, they outlawed Bible reading in public schools. In 1973, they made abortion a constitutional right. In 1980, they abolished Ten Commandment plaques in public schools. That case was Stone versus Graham. The court prohibited public schools from even displaying a plaque with the Ten Commandments on it, even though no one mentioned it. They didn't try to lecture on it. They were just passively hanging on the wall. But yet, the court said it violated the establishment clause of the First Amendment. Here's what they basically said, and I quote, if the posted copies of the Ten Commandments are to have any effect at all, it will be to induce school children to read, meditate upon, perhaps to venerate and obey the Ten Commandments. This is not a permissible objective. End of quote. Okay. In 1985, they did away with Alabama's minute of silence because they said, wait a minute, students might use that minute of silence to pray. In 1989, they eliminated nativity scenes in public squares and buildings. In 1992, they eliminated prayers at high school graduations. In 2000, they eliminated student prayers at afternoon football games. This is what Justice Rehnquist said in his dissent. He said, the decision, quote, bristles with hostility to all things religious in public life. So we're in a great moral crisis today. Our courts, our schools, our intellectual elite, and the media express hostility to God and religion in public discourse. Most political leaders have voluntarily abandoned their principles to gain the support of special interest groups and the editorial commentators they want to please. So they sacrifice their principles of truth on the altar of political expediency. Too many of our leaders glorify compromise and peddle sincerity as a substitute for truth and principles. Even religious leaders have become displays and Christmas songs are now prohibited. School prayers at graduations are outlawed. Ten Commandment displays are outlawed. Crosses on public property are outlawed. We protect the spotted owl and yet forsake the unborn child. So the message to the Tea Party this afternoon is, do what that unknown farmer did. Your Lexington Green is the ballot box this November. Will you be there? Thank you.
Any questions for Dick? One over here.
Because, if I got it right, the court decision from the Supreme Court says, in the opinion of the court, and then they go ahead and legislate in that decision. Why is that allowed in our Constitution? It's allowed in our Constitution because we don't have enough courageous people to impeach the Supreme Court justices that violate the law. Okay? That's the problem. They had three separate branches of government, each to operate with its own sphere and not in any other sphere. The Supreme Court was there to interpret the law, not to make the law, as Justice Young was talking about. This is what Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1820. It is a very dangerous doctrine to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions. It is one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarch. And that's what we have today. 9 unelected justices holding lifetime appointments, telling us in almost every important sphere of our lives what is the law.
How do you go about impeaching us?
It's Congress's job. The Congress has the job of impeaching justices who have gone beyond the law. They can do this where the House of Representatives file the articles of impeachment, and then the Senate becomes the judiciary to hear the argument. You know, we tried that with President Clinton with his Monica Lewinsky stuff. They weren't successful, but that's the same process that we would use. A long time ago, judges used to control themselves. There was this judicial restraint that they had. They didn't go beyond interpreting the law. But since the 1950s, they become more and more active, where they now decide the law according to their own political ideology and philosophy, rather than what the law is. That's what happened to Justice Phillips, or Judge Phillips, on the Domas Hotel issue, and that happens all the time in the Supreme Court. So now the Supreme Court has become the super legislature of our country. And we have to stop that if we're going to stop an oligarchy from taking over control. We used to believe that we were governed by the consent of the people. No, we're governed by 9 people. That's it.
One last question, Dick.
How is Thomas Law Law Firm funded? Is it a job? And what's the status of those funds? What limitations do you have on the cases that you're pursuing because of them?
That question is dear to my heart. We are funded by donations. We are a In addition to that, they get a lot of free support from publicly funded law schools. Your taxpayers go to support the salaries of these professors. These professors use these young law students to do the research for the ACLU. Our budget is $2 billion compared to $9 billion, so you can see what the difference is. But we've got a bunch of Marines on board, and we don't need many lawyers compared to the ACLU. As Brian said, I didn't get involved in Obamacare. We filed the first lawsuit against the president. We named the president as a defendant in that lawsuit. And individuals at the Thomas More Law Center. A federal district judge a couple of weeks ago dismissed our case, but we now have an appeal, and the Wall Street Journal just wrote an article saying the Thomas More Law Center's case is the best case because it's going to get up to the Supreme Court before all these other cases. And that was the strategy we used.
Registration forms on the table right there. Registration forms.
Good. I didn't know we had one.
These are our next announcement.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
We are missing the opportunity to under California, Proposition 8 didn't pass the allocation test. 75% of the African Americans in California are the ones that voted to support marriage. Man and woman. Many of these people in these urban areas are social workers. They are pro-life, God-fearing people. Everything else.
You're not speaking for all.
Is this a question?
I'm trying to make a point.
Take a big round of applause again.